we're now going to turn it over to our final presentation. And for this one, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to be hearing from Manon Van Kouswijk. I've been messing it up all day. Knew I was going to do that. Kouswijk, Manon Van Kouswijk. For this presentation, we'll follow a different format. As Manon resides in Australia, we had to be clever with the time difference. She's 14 hours ahead of us, so she's well asleep, hopefully, right now. We had Manon record her presentation, and then Margot Chipo, one of our instructors and artists at the BJC, developed a series of questions to ask Manon based on her presentation. So what you'll see today is Manon's talk and a PowerPoint followed by a brief Q&A with Margot that our wonderful Jay Diamond put together, edited together. Manon is a Dutch artist and contemporary jeweler who lives and works in Naarm, Melbourne, and Toora, Australia. She studied fine art and contemporary jewelry at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, before later on working as the head of the Jewellery Department there before moving to Australia in 2010. Manon often uses the term findings when describing her position as an artist within the contemporary jewelry field. So Anna Maria, there's that word again. She uses the word findings because it can refer both to the outcome of research or investigation or discovery, while also referring to the small tools and materials and parts and pieces that the artist uses, a jeweler's findings. Manon views her practice as an ongoing exploration of the potential for jewelry to happen. Her findings are mediated through the making of objects, through photography, drawing, artist books, and exhibitions. Manon's works are connected through a consistent interest in archetypal objects and in the public and private contexts in which these objects are used, worn, displayed, or preserved. Manon's work is exhibited in galleries and museums and is part of private and public collections worldwide. Margot, who conducted the Q&A with Manon, is a Baltimore-based illustrator, silversmith, and jeweler who teaches at the BJC, as I said. So just give us a moment to start that presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I hope that I can make myself as three-dimensional as possible within this virtual space. I'm zooming from Toora, which is a place in Gippsland in Australia. I'm from the Netherlands, and this is where I've lived and worked in Toora and Melbourne since 2010. I'd like to thank Shane Prada for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to think through and talk about my work from the perspective of the archival process. And I would also like to thank Margot Chipo for engaging with me in a conversation about my work. When I started putting this presentation together, I also realized that this in itself is a kind of archival process to organize material in this way. So I've made a selection of my work through 10 small chapters that show aspects of archiving being used as a method to organize and to exhibit my work. So I would like to start also by giving you a bit of insight into how my work began. I think beginnings are quite interesting, and I think I often try to find a way to create a new beginning from time to time, to sort of give myself the opportunity to start working again from a blank slate. I was trained as a goldsmith in the Netherlands, and then I studied fine art and jewelry at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. And this experience of going to art school is very much what has informed and shaped my practice in the way that it is today. So in 1995, I graduated from the Gerrit Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam with a project that looked at the classical pearl chain. At that time, that was a bit of a taboo. We were not really encouraged to explore conventional jewelry forms. Through a series of interventions, I remade and reconfigured this object. So in these two necklaces, I worked with very old, worn out pearls that I selected from a jeweler shop repair box. And as you can see, they're not perfect at all. And they are in many ways the opposite of what the ideal pearl chain is supposed to represent as a symbol of material wealth and perfection. Through this intervention, the material comes alive and talks about time and wear, about the organic nature of its material and the way that jewelry objects are passed on over generations. I find it interesting that the basic principles of the pearl chain and other beaded necklaces haven't changed since the earliest examples that we know. The thread, the beads, and the knots allow for endless variations and reinterpretations. I work with these elements from within. I'm not trying to find a new form for the object. I use the given format as a template to work from and to reconfigure and translate. So this interest in the standard form of the pearl necklace also extends within my work to a range of other archetypal everyday objects like spoons, crockery, stationery, and textiles. In this series of 4 spoons, I have marked the areas where the taste buds for the different tastes are located on the tongue in the bowl of the spoon. And so the object becomes like a topography of taste projected onto the instrument that we eat with. And these are in Dutch. And so from the right to the left, it is sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. As a memory of a dinner with friends, I started collecting stains, and I decided to embroider them very precisely onto a tablecloth, which creates a kind of contradiction. It elevates the stains to a form of decoration, even though, you know, they are actually something that we do not really want in our pristine white table linen. This series of exercise books called handschrift. Handschrift is a word in Dutch that both refers to handwriting as well as to the exercise book. So I stitched these on the sewing machine, which makes them kind of 3-dimensional, but at the same time, it also makes it difficult to write in them. And then after working with textile and cutlery, it seemed like a logical step to also start working with everyday objects through ceramics, which I did in 2002 in a residency at the European Ceramic Work Center in Den Bosch in the Netherlands. And I developed a set of shapes based on crockery and spoons and on the space between the table and the object. So for example, the one all the way on the right, the tablespoon, is a cast of the space between the spoon and the table. The work was very much influenced by the casting process and by the plaster molds being a form that describes the space around the object. In this series of objects, I worked with the typology of domestic objects like spoons and cups, trying to materialize the way we handle them and the physical space they occupy when we use them. Many of my works are based on objects and materials that I find and collect. I'm interested in the different types of objects that we choose as souvenirs or gifts, and in ordinary things that we accumulate, like stationery. At some point, the collecting of materials and objects developed from a starting point in my work and a source of material into a subject of the work itself. In 2008, I decided to make an artist publication based on a large group of butterflies that I had collected by cutting them from objects that I sourced predominantly from flea markets and op shops, and occasionally from the well-known Dutch department store, the HEMA. In collaboration with visual artist Uta Eisenreich, I worked on a series of images for the book, and graphic designer Esther de Vries developed a beautiful format for the publication that suited the images very well. The book itself is actually, in a way, designed to be a bit like a butterfly. The visual material was accompanied by short text fragments written by Monica Gaspar. Throughout the entire project, two sources are merging: the everyday objects and the different aspects of the activity of butterfly collecting: diversity and similarity, rare and common species, flea market and entomology, eBay and taxonomic classification, pleasure and obsession, typology and personification of objects. In the images, we explored different traditions of arranging objects, forming patterns, using biological phenomena like mimicry and the naming of species. The butterflies appear at the very end on a poster in the back sleeve of the publication. To some degree, the project was also about production and distribution. In the process, the mass-produced objects were turned into unique handmade pieces. The book was printed and distributed, and when the objects were sold, they were sold individually. And then the beat goes on. As such, I work across a range of materials and objects. This allows me to bring what I discover in other media back to the making, unmaking, and remaking of the beaded necklace and other jewelry forms. If I could turn a beaded necklace inside out, I would do it. And I think in many ways, you could say that this is what I'm forever trying to achieve. In 2000, I started making paper pearls, a multiple made of the round archive stickers from an office supply shop, also used in art galleries to mark the works that are sold in an exhibition. As a material, these are ephemeral. This is not an everlasting piece of jewelry that can become a heirloom. And my idea is that if the wearer were to replace the stickers that fall off inevitably over time, the object will no longer be made by me, but remade by them. Hanging around the pearl chain principle. After the experience of making the butterfly book, I was quite keen to see if I could make a book that had my beaded necklaces as a starting point. And because the collaboration on the butterfly book had been a very pleasant one, I decided to work again with the same team, with Uta Eisenreich and Esther de Vries. I was wondering if I could make a book that would have jewelry as a starting point, and that wouldn't be a catalog of my work, but more of an artist book that could also possibly be of interest to an audience outside of the contemporary jewelry field. Alongside the making of beaded necklaces, I had been collecting an archive of images that showed the principles of the beaded necklace in other source material than jewelry. The thread, the knots, the necklace as a system and a language, the repetition of elements, the sequence as found in nature, in science, in the landscape. I worked on this archive more intensively over a period of time, and I selected a group of necklaces to be photographed for the book. In the photography of the work, we explored ways of displaying necklaces in different contexts, like a jewelry shop window, a museum catalog, an auction website, an ethnographic display. Because of the different parts of the book, the images of the necklaces and the collected images archive, the book has been made as if it's two books that have been combined into one. There are two different covers, two font types, two types of paper, glossy and matte. One part is full color, the other part is black and white. Each part of the book has its own title, written essay, and colophon. When the book was launched with an exhibition at Jewellery in Amsterdam in 2010, I presented the work exactly as it was photographed in the book, in the gallery space. So the exhibition was a bit like walking into a three-dimensional version of the publication. Out of the office, I started making these in 2014. It's a series of necklaces that I make by removing the plastic sheathing from mass-produced paper clips, then cutting these segments into pieces and stringing them on a piece of thread. So in this process, it transforms an industrial product into a unique handmade object, from made in China to made in Melbourne. They form a sequence in which the making of each piece responds to the previous one. The necklaces are all exactly identical in size and format, while each one is unique in its color and pattern. As such, each of these pieces are in a state of transition between the previous one and the next one. By now, half of the series has been sold, and in re-exhibiting them, I replaced the sold pieces with the print of the piece on the actual size and the name of the owner. In this process, the three-dimensional installation gradually shifts to a two-dimensional documentation of the project, and it is at the same time a way of archiving the dissemination of the work. 1,488 beads, 16 colors, 7 materials, 1 ceiling. This was an exhibition in 2016 at the National in Christchurch in New Zealand. And the image that I created for the invitation was like an archiving of the ingredients of the work in the exhibition. 25 porcelain necklaces were made with 3 different making processes. For this series, I pressed black clay in plaster molds and applied color in between the beads. For the second series, I pressed white porcelain clay through custom-made metal templates, each shape then having a different profile. In the third series, I shaped cylinders of porcelain clay and twisted the material to form beads or segments, which resulted in quite organic forms. In the exhibition, the necklaces were suspended from wooden frames as hanging devices that were mounted on the ceiling. They were hanging at a height that allowed visitors to walk through the exhibition, to get up close to the necklaces and to, in a way, almost project them onto the body, to envisage what it would be like to wear them. In 2015, I published another artist book, and I titled it Findings. The word findings has multiple meanings. It is commonly used to describe the outcome of research, investigation, or discovery. However, it also refers to the small tools and various materials used by an artisan, a jeweler's findings. I like very much how this word sort of sums up different aspects of my practice. So this book brings together hand-shaped porcelain necklaces and cast porcelain brooches through an archive of mostly found images that I traced for the book. The necklaces and the brooches are both, in different ways, materializations of negative space. The segments and the beads of the necklaces, are made by pressing porcelain clay in the space between my fingers and the palms of my hands. The brooches are made of porcelain slip cast in clay molds that are bisque fired and as such are still porous, so they work a bit like plaster. So this is an image of the mold, so you can imagine how the material is poured in there and creates that imprint. The traced drawings show the context in which the objects can perform or be performed, be handled, displayed, worn, or kept. Using the tracing as a method in combination with these works made sense to me, as it creates negative space by removing information from the images. In the back of the book, an index contains all the images of my work, as well as the image archive that I used to make the traced drawings. This is where you can find the visual information that is missing from the drawings. Making Faces, a jewelry playbook. This is a project that I started working on somewhere around 2016. There are, of course, many examples of making a face into a wearable necklace. And this is something that I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do it. I didn't want the face to be visible when you wear the necklace. So I wanted it to be disguised in a way. I had this idea of the necklace being a bit like a secret companion that was only known to the wearer. And so I ended up making a face out of these kind of plastic beads that are fused on a thread. And then I realized that this was as simple as I wanted it to be, a beaded line that can become a face, a bit like wearing a drawing. And when I was teaching in the winter sessions at Rhode Island School of Design in 2017, I sourced boxes full of these beads at Wolf E. Miro. And I imagine that many of you would probably be familiar with that place as a treasure trove of jewelry materials. I liked the idea of using this kind of leftover stock from costume jewelry production to make these pieces, because the material sort of makes it look and feel a bit like toys. I also made a more labor-intensive, smaller series of the necklaces in porcelain as well. Then I started thinking about how I would present this transformation from a linear object to a face. I wanted to exhibit the necklaces in their abstract appearance as a sequence and a system, so that initially you have no idea what else they might be. The artist publication that I decided to create with this project then reveals their appearance as faces. And it serves as a playbook for ways of playing with, displaying, and wearing the pieces. The poster that is the cover of the book has an archive of all the faces on the inside. In this project, the publication is actually an inseparable part of the work and its presentation. Without the book, the work is incomplete. The publication kind of is like a key that unlocks the project. And this is how I presented the work again at the National in their current big space in Christchurch in New Zealand. And this was an exhibition that I made with the gallery remotely while I was in Melbourne in lockdown. And they made this construction for me to present the work in the space. So I've actually never been there and seen this exhibition myself. I only know it from photographs, but it looks exactly the way that I envisaged it to be. So then I'm arriving at the last exhibition that I would like to talk about, which took place in 2022 at Gallery Funaki in Melbourne. And some of you might know that Gallery Funaki gave up their gallery space at the start of the pandemic. And then in 2022, they moved into a gallery space that is an apartment in the center of the city. And Vita Cochran is a New Zealand artist who works predominantly with fabric. And so when we started talking about making this exhibition together, Katie Scott of Gallery Funaki told us that the building that the gallery is now in used to be part of the Melbourne clothes manufacturing district. And so because of Vita's work, where she takes apart clothing and reconfigures it into these wall hangings, which of course for this context was really fitting, I then decided to also, through the presentation of my work, try to respond to some degree to the history of the space. And I did that in a kind of loose way, not in a specific way. So I displayed the porcelain pendants that I exhibited on these traced cloth hangers, like a drawing on the wall. Then there were other objects in the exhibition, also domestic objects, which I felt were really, suiting to that kind of environment. So I made plates, I made candlesticks. I had a series of vases that I made for a different project that also were placed in the apartment. And then for my brooches, I made this little display cabinet where I presented the brooches and used my own fabric collection as a background. So it sort of looked a bit like they were displayed on samples from a fabric book. I realized that some of the stationery that I had been collecting was very similar to the patterning on my own shirts. And so I ended up getting the brooches photographed on my shirts and on my stationery collection, which is a little bit nerdy, I have to admit. And then I turned that into a poster, and the work ended up being displayed like this in the wardrobe of the gallery bedroom. So that brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to dive right in. So there seems to be equal parts play and formal research in your projects. Can you describe the role of play in developing your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you do a talk like this, I think the part of it is that it can sometimes seem extremely like it all looks really resolved, and then it all seems really logical. And because you don't see, the process and the mess that happens in the process, it all seems like it's kind of quite rational, I think. And I think, my work probably can come across sometimes as very rational, but it takes a really long time to sort of figure out that, to get to that point where it is actually resolved, and where I've made all those decisions about, how I want to present it and how it comes together. And so I think the role of play is actually really, really significant in most of the projects that I do. And the making is also always really important. So developing ideas through the making and through doing, tons of testing and trying things that are not working out as well. So I think that's a really, really significant part of the work, but you don't always see that at the end, I think. And maybe in some projects more than others. And I think it also maybe depends sometimes on the materials, like clay, for example, is really such a tactile material, and it allows you to very quickly sort of try things.
Yeah.
Whereas, some other materials are not as immediate, I guess.
That makes sense. And I know you spend like, it seems like you spend a lot of time with projects, which gives you a lot of like room to play around.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, some things sort of, you know, develop also over a number of years, where I might use a part, like, you know, I might present a project as part of an exhibition, and then I will continue to work on it and develop it further. So there's like a few iterations of one idea, or also maybe in the way that I present it, I change it over time. So I think, you know, exhibitions are such important ways to test things. Yeah, quite necessary actually to be able to do that.
That's wonderful. And then you get to get people's responses from the exhibition.
Yeah, hopefully, like if you're lucky, you know. I think people don't always dare to, they don't always dare to be honest about, you know, what they think, but if they do, it's kind of really, can be really helpful to get, you know, honest feedback, like I didn't like that so much, or that didn't work for me, and but that did. Yeah.
Oh, it's good to have friends like that.
It is, yeah, that are prepared to, you know, stick their neck out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess I can ask if there's anything else that you want to add to that. I can ask you another question. See, I'm gonna ask, when you were working on making faces, at what point did you realize that a book was essential to the project?
I think when I started developing that idea, it was also so I wanted to make a necklace that sort of incorporated a face. And initially, you know, I think I started doing that in a way that has already been done quite a bit. You know, there are a lot of examples of necklaces that are based on faces that sort of have like elements of the face hanging from the necklace. That's not a new idea at all. And so when you wear it, you literally see a face. And so at some point I realized that that was not what I wanted to do. And so I ended up making this line that can become a face, but when you wear it, you don't see it. And so it was more that idea of, you know, wearing a piece that is a bit like a secret companion. And so the wearer knows this, but, you know, you can't actually see it. So it's an abstract object. And that's, I guess, when I realized that that's what the piece was going to be, I was kind of interested in using the book as a sort of key to unlock that part of the work. Yeah. And to where I could also, you know, play around with photography and ways of showing those necklaces in different kind of formats, or worn on the body and then displayed and changing form, like transforming, showing all the transformations. Yeah, it just made sense to do that through a book.
Yeah, I feel like the book is in jewelry we talk a lot about brooch backs, and you probably like just talking about like the secret like delight of the brooch back, and I feel like it feels like a brooch back almost. It's a really fun book. And I like thought about how you were how you find beads everywhere in the world. You see them like everywhere, and I've started seeing them everywhere because of
it's contagious.
It's really, I mean, it's like so fun to think about that form and how it lives in so many ways around us. But then I was thinking too about the phenomenon of people seeing faces everywhere in like cars and electronic plugs, and how you've made beads into faces. There's like this full circle kind of like.
Yeah, that's true, actually. I think that's also, yeah, that's a nice observation as well. I think when I started developing the book of the beads, I was also thinking about Charles and Ray Eames, the film that they did where they zoom out from, what is it called?
The Powers of 10.
Powers
That's
of 10.
my
Powers
favorite.
of
That's
10.
one of my, I show that to like so many people I know because I love that movie.
Yeah, so my idea was a little bit, like you could do something similar with the idea of the necklace, where you find that principle also on a cellular and molecular level, and then when you zoom out, you find it, on a planetary level, etc., etc. So, and I didn't stick to it in a strict way, but that was kind of the idea in the beginning.
Oh wow! And was this for making faces?
No, the hanging around the pearl chain.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, like the image archive of that has all these examples that are also really, on a different scale, but also from DNA, for example, a strand of DNA which has that kind of necklace form, to also like, the examples in the cosmos and planets and.
I can totally see that. They do, yeah, it's everywhere. Let's see. So, my last question for you is, do you keep a journal or sketchbook? And if so, what kinds of things do you put inside?
Yeah, I think I usually I'm not very organized with that, I have to say. It's quite sort of random, but I do usually have like a sketchbook or a few sketchbook lying around. And sometimes when I do one project, I try to really, keep that in one sketchbook. And I make drawings, not always, but sort of drawings just as a way to remember ideas. Not so much that they're, like they're really not great drawings. Sadly, they're not great drawings, but they just help me to remember ideas. So it's mostly a combination of drawing and writing down, sort of taking notes. And I do usually sort of take that everywhere. Yeah.
So you'll write down an idea when you have it, like in the moment. Do you have like a archive of sketchbooks?
Well, no. I guess I do, probably, if I can find them all together. Like they're sort of scattered, and so I'm actually not very organized in that. I realize that's just coming back to that idea of, my work looking quite rational, and it's all, it's all quite sort of organized and neat and stuff. But if you see my studio, it's not like that. I wish it was, but it's not.
We're glancing behind the bead curtain.
Yeah, exactly. When you open the cupboards, it's like, oh no.
Do you ever like find an old sketchbook and like surprise yourself with the ideas inside?
I do sometimes revisit older sketchbooks because, there are usually things in it that you haven't done, and then they can be interesting to kind of, have a look at again and sort of see whether they can be a new sort of starting point.
And fresh stuff. Yeah. I would love to see them one day. Maybe I'll see your sketchbooks.
I always think that I should try and be more organized, but I just don't find the time,
I mean, I can relate to that. I think my sketchbooks are only organized because they're big. I don't have anywhere else to put them except on a bookshelf.
That's good. And I think another way of, you could like, if you stuck with one format for the sketchbooks, that would also be like, keep them consistent or something. And mine are just like anything and everything. Yeah.
Do you ever like cut things out and put them inside? Are you that?
I do sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. I do actually.
That seems, I feel like I can see that. I can picture that. Because I think we talked a little bit in our like get to know each other talk about like how you keep all your images for your art, like for your books and for your references. would you like to elaborate?
Well, actually, that's because so the book on the pearl chains, those images were mostly digital. So I sourced them online. I think we spoke about that in our previous talk as well. Yeah, there was a whole discussion with the graphic designer about the nature of sourcing online, and she was a bit ambivalent about that because she sort of said, oh, it's a bit lazy or something, to search online. And so I did take a few weeks where I tried to see how much I could find if I, just looked in books and in the library and on flea, like everywhere. And I didn't come up with much at all. And it made me realize that, the nature of those images were really very much enabled by online searching and finding the right search terms to discover things. And then there were, of course, also a lot of other artists were doing that, because I mean, that whole world of images that has opened up through being able to search them online is really quite something. It's interesting for artists. I mean,
Yeah,
so I disagreed with her.
I think you did the right thing.
Yeah, I just knew that, the vast majority of those images I would not have been able to find in any other way.
Yeah, you've got some really great.
I proved it scientifically,
Well, there's the logic, there's the rational.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. Well,
thank you.
thank you. I'm so grateful that I got a chance to speak with you, and
Well, thank you too. It's been really enjoyable. Yeah.
thank you. And thank you, Jewellery Center, Baltimore Jewellery Center, as always.